This is my true story. I gave everything I had so my son could live a better life than mine. I worked in heat, hunger, and pain, believing one day he'd stand beside me with pride. But when success came his way, he forgot who helped him climb. He mocked me in front of others for being poor, for having rough hands, for not wearing a suit. My heart broke that day, but I didn't argue. I just promised myself one thing. He would see who I truly was. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from, and please subscribe. I raised him in a one-room house with broken walls and a leaky roof. Every night I would patch holes with old newspapers to keep the rain out. He slept peacefully while I stayed awake, counting the coins I had left for food. I worked long hours at a small shoe repair stall near the bus stop. My hands were always rough, blackened with glue and dust, but I never complained. Each shoe I fixed meant another meal for him, another notebook for his school, another chance at a better future. When he was little, he would hold my hand and say, "One day, I'll buy you a big house." Those words kept me alive during the hardest winters. I wanted him to study, to rise above poverty, to escape the pain I knew too well. So I gave up everything, my comfort, my health, even my pride, just to see him walk through the college gates. I sold my wedding ring to pay his admission fee. I borrowed money from neighbors and faced insults just so he could have a good start. When I walked him to the city bus the day he left for his first job, I stood there smiling as he drove away. My heart was full of hope, believing he would never forget where he came from. But months turned into years, and distance turned into silence. He stopped calling, stopped visiting. When I tried to reach him, his number was always busy. I told myself he must be working hard, that he'd remember me soon. I used to wait outside my house every evening, watching buses pass, thinking one of them would bring him home. The small boy who once shared half his bread with me had now become a man who couldn't spare a word. Still, I never cursed him. I prayed for his success every night, even when I ate only rice and salt for dinner. I believed love and sacrifice always come back around. But I was wrong. One day I saw his face on a billboard, well-dressed, confident, smiling next to the company logo. I was proud and broken at the same time. Proud that my son had made it, broken because I was not part of that success. He never told anyone who I was. He said his father was a businessman who died young. I was still alive, still repairing shoes outside the same bus stop. When people from our town saw me, they whispered, "That's his father?" Some laughed. Some pitied me. But I stayed silent. I didn't want to stain his image. I thought maybe he had his reasons. Maybe he was ashamed of poverty, not of me. I convinced myself of that lie every day just to survive the ache. The boy who once shared my dreams had become a stranger living in a world too shiny for my reflection. And yet, I couldn't stop being his father. Even when he forgot me, I never forgot him. Every shoe I fixed, every coin I saved, every breath I took, it was still for him. I went to visit him one evening after hearing from someone that he had become a big man in the city. I cleaned my old shirt, polished my worn-out shoes, and carried a small gift in a brown paper bag. The city was loud and full of lights that made my eyes ache. When I reached his office, I stood outside the glass doors, staring at the nameplate that carried his name. My heart swelled with pride and nervousness. I walked in, expecting warmth, expecting a hug, expecting something that would make all those years of pain worth it. But the moment he saw me, everything changed. His expression turned cold, and the people around him looked at me as if I didn't belong there. I stood quietly, trying not to shake. I could feel the sweat running down my back as I clutched the small paper bag in my hand. He asked someone to bring him coffee while I waited in silence. The walls were white and shiny, everything expensive, everything clean. I felt like a stain on the floor. I looked around and saw the people working, dressed in suits, typing on computers, walking fast. I thought about the times when I used to dream that one day he would sit in a place like this. I thought about the hunger I endured, the nights I worked through pain, the days I went without food so he could learn and live better. Then he looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that hurt more than hunger ever did. It wasn't anger. It was shame. He didn't want me there. I realized it before he even opened his mouth. The gift in my hand suddenly felt heavy. I wanted to give him something small, something to remind him of home. But my fingers froze. His voice was calm, but it sliced through me like glass. I understood everything from the way he spoke, from the way he avoided my eyes, from the quiet laughter that followed from his friends nearby. I didn't answer. I stood there with a lump in my throat, feeling smaller than I ever had before. The people around me smiled at him, laughed at something I couldn't hear. The sound blurred. My heart slowed down. I turned toward the window, watching the lights of the city outside. I could see my reflection on the glass. Old, tired, out of place. I realized that the boy I raised was gone. I was just a reminder of the poverty he had escaped. My chest burned, but I didn't let a single tear fall. I straightened my back, nodded once, and walked out of that office without looking behind. The brown paper bag tore a little in my hand as I held it tighter, but I didn't let it drop. On the way back, I sat on the edge of the street, surrounded by people rushing home. Nobody noticed me. I kept staring at the sky, wondering if I had done something wrong. Maybe I had given him too much. Maybe I had made him forget the value of struggle. Maybe love without boundaries makes people blind. The walk home felt longer than usual. Every step carried a memory: his first school uniform, his first shoes, his first bicycle. I reached my house late at night and placed the torn paper bag on the table. Inside it was a wristwatch I had saved for months to buy. I looked at it for a long time and then put it away in a drawer. That was the night I accepted that my son was gone. Not dead, but lost. Lost to pride, to wealth, to the belief that money made him better than the man who gave him everything. I lay on my bed and stared at the ceiling until morning, thinking about how silence hurts more than words ever could. That night didn't break me. It changed me. It taught me that respect cannot be bought, and love without gratitude always turns cold. After that day, I stopped waiting for his calls. The phone stayed silent, covered in dust, sitting beside the window where I used to keep it close every evening. The sound of it never came again. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and then into years. The distance between us became heavier than poverty ever was. Festivals came and went. I watched the neighbors light lamps, cook sweets, and welcome their children home. My door stayed closed. My dinner was always quiet. The laughter I once dreamed of hearing again had long vanished from my small home. I tried writing him letters. Each word was simple, a father's love written in shaky handwriting. I never got a reply. I mailed 5 of them. None came back, but none were answered. Somewhere in that city, my words were lost. Maybe they were thrown away. Maybe they were never opened. I stopped celebrating my birthday. It didn't feel like a day anymore. The candles were useless, the cake unnecessary. The only thing that grew each year was silence. My friends would ask if I'd heard from my son. I always smiled and lied. I said he was busy, that he was doing well, that he'd visit soon. They nodded, pretending to believe me. Inside, I knew the truth. He had erased me. Not out of hate, but out of convenience. Poverty doesn't fit in a photo frame of success. A father who repaired shoes doesn't belong in business circles and parties filled with people wearing suits. I was his past, and he had buried it. I started walking every morning to the bus stop just to see faces. I liked watching people rush to work, holding coffee, wearing ties. It made me feel close to him in some way. I imagined him among them, living the life I built for him through my pain. It gave me a strange peace, even if it hurt. One afternoon, I found his old report cards in a drawer. They still had my signature at the bottom. The paper was yellow and wrinkled. I traced my name with my finger and smiled. That was the only place where I still existed in his life, as a signature at the bottom of his beginnings. Years kept passing. My back bent with time, my hair turned gray, but the ache stayed the same. I wasn't angry anymore. I had stopped asking why. I accepted that love sometimes ends without warning, not because it runs out, but because it is forgotten. My small shoe stall became my world again. I sat there every morning, repairing soles, stitching leather, and watching children pass by holding their parents' hands. I would see fathers carrying their sons, teaching them to cross the road carefully, feeding them snacks, smiling proudly. It always made me think of the days when I carried him on my shoulders through the same market. Sometimes people would recognize me. They'd whisper, "He's the father of that rich man in the city." Some spoke with admiration, others with pity. I didn't correct them. I just nodded and went back to my work. The smell of glue, the dust, the sound of tools, they became my only company. But something inside me was changing. The humiliation I once felt was turning into fuel. The silence that once hurt me started giving me focus. Every cut, every repair, every customer taught me something. I learned patience. I learned observation. I learned how the world works. One day, while repairing a shoe, a man stopped by and said he knew someone selling a small workshop nearby. The price was low because no one wanted to take the risk. I looked at my savings, small, but enough to try. For the first time in years, I felt alive. The pain of losing my son became the fire that pushed me forward. That was the day I decided to build something for myself. Not for him. Not for anyone else. Just for the man who once believed he had nothing left. I started with nothing but my old tools and a rusted table under a broken shed. The workshop I bought was falling apart, its walls cracked, its machines dead. The floor was covered in dust and forgotten dreams of the man who once owned it. Most people laughed when they heard I had bought it. They said I was too old, too poor, too late to start anything new. I didn't answer. I just worked. Every morning before sunrise, I swept the floor, cleaned the tools, and patched the roof. I slept on the same bench I worked on, covering myself with an old blanket when the nights got cold. The first few weeks were hard. Some days I earned nothing. Some days I repaired 1 or 2 shoes and saved every coin in a small tin box under my bed. Hunger followed me, but so did hope. One afternoon, a worker from the nearby factory came with torn boots. I repaired them neatly and charged him less than he expected. He was surprised by the quality. He told his friends. The next day, 3 more came, then 5, then 10. Soon I was repairing shoes for half the factory. Every coin went back into the shop. I bought new stitching needles, a small sewing machine, a few shelves, and paint to fix the walls. Bit by bit, the place started to look alive again. I learned to listen to people. What they needed, what they wanted fixed, what they wished existed. I started repairing not just shoes, but also leather belts, bags, and gloves. I gave receipts, kept books, maintained honesty. Slowly, the word spread. The men who once laughed at me now came asking if I needed help. I couldn't pay them much, but I gave them food and fair wages. Together, we built something small but solid. Then came a day that changed everything. One of the factory managers asked if I could make custom leather gloves for his workers. I agreed, though I had never made them before. I stayed awake all night cutting patterns and sewing pieces together. My fingers bled, my back hurt, but I finished them. He loved them and placed a bulk order. That order became my first real profit. With that money, I bought another machine, then a second-hand motorbike to deliver orders myself. I no longer worked under the sun by the roadside. I worked inside walls I owned. I painted a small sign outside that read, "Ravi Leatherworks." It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I smiled without pain. I started keeping records, learning about pricing, supply, and materials. I met suppliers, learned to bargain, learned how to plan. I wasn't educated like my son, but life had taught me what no book ever could: consistency, discipline, and humility. Months passed, and the small workshop began to grow faster than I imagined. I hired 2 more workers. We made wallets, belts, and gloves in bulk. A nearby store started selling our products. I watched people buy them without knowing the old man behind the label once repaired shoes outside their factory gate. Every evening, I locked the door, looked up at the name board, and whispered a quiet thank you to the pain that pushed me there. Poverty had taken everything from me, but in return, it had taught me how to survive. I didn't think about my son anymore. I didn't need to. He had chosen his path, and now I had mine. What once felt like an ending had become a beginning. The man he left behind in shame was now standing again, not with anger, but with purpose. That was the start of everything that followed. The rise he never saw coming. The workshop that once echoed with emptiness now buzzed with life. The sound of stitching machines filled the mornings, and the smell of fresh leather mixed with hot tea became the scent of survival. I arrived before sunrise every day and left long after the streets turned quiet. The same hands that once begged for work now signed pay slips for others. My workers respected me. They saw how I worked harder than all of them combined, never taking a day off, never raising my voice. The name Ravi Leatherworks began to mean something in the area. People from other towns started calling, asking for orders, asking if we could make bulk shipments. I didn't own fancy clothes, but I owned something better: freedom. My bills were paid on time, my meals were warm, my savings grew. I expanded the workshop into the empty lot next door and built a proper office. It had a small desk, a filing cabinet, and an old computer. For the first time, I sat in a chair meant for a boss. But even then, I never forgot where I came from. I still repaired shoes for the poor for free. I still sat with my workers during lunch. I still ate from the same tin plate. Success had not changed me. It had only removed my fear of failure. Every morning, I stood at the entrance of my workshop, watching my workers walk in with purpose. Some were once jobless men who couldn't feed their families. Now they earned steady wages and sent their children to school. That gave me more happiness than any profit ever could. Each paycheck I signed was a reminder that I had turned humiliation into strength. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. My life itself had become the proof. The city slowly began to notice. Local stores displayed my products proudly. Small magazines wrote about the humble craftsman who built an empire from nothing. I never gave interviews. I didn't want fame. I wanted peace. But deep inside, I remembered the night my son looked at me like I was nothing. That memory never faded. It didn't make me bitter. It made me unstoppable. Years rolled by. The small workshop became a registered company. I hired accountants, managers, delivery drivers, and designers. I built a team that believed in hard work, not luck. We moved from hand tools to machines, from a single shop to multiple outlets. I invested carefully, saved every penny, and refused to take shortcuts. My company grew slowly but honestly. I never borrowed money I couldn't repay. I never made promises I couldn't keep. Soon, I started exporting small orders overseas: gloves, wallets, and belts. The papers called me a self-made businessman. The same people who once laughed at my broken shoes now greeted me with respect. Even the factory manager who once ignored me came asking for partnership deals. I shook his hand, not to show power, but to show that I had none of his pride. At night, when I sat alone in my office, I often thought about how strange life could be. The boy who was ashamed of me had forgotten that success built without gratitude always falls apart. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want him to suffer. I only wanted him to see that the poor man he mocked could build an empire without help, without pity, without lies. My workers began to call me sir. At first, I felt shy when they said it. I was still the same man, the one who patched shoes with thread and hope. But with time, I understood that respect isn't demanded. It's earned through effort. Every sir I heard was a piece of the dignity I had once lost. By then, I owned 3 workshops and dozens of employees. My name appeared on contracts, invoices, and signboards. The old shoe stall outside the bus stop was gone, replaced by a bright new showroom that carried my brand. People walked in, tried on leather jackets, and smiled, unaware that the man who owned it all once worked barefoot in the same streets. I looked at the empire I had built quietly, brick by brick, without noise or applause. It was not made of gold or marble. It was made of endurance. And I promised myself that the next time life tested me, I would not flinch. It happened suddenly, years after I had stopped thinking about him. His name appeared again, not in a magazine or business paper this time, but in the news. The company he worked for was under investigation for fraud and corruption. The same place that once printed his smiling photo on posters now printed his face beside headlines about arrests, losses, and unpaid debts. I sat in my office chair, reading every line slowly. My hands didn't shake. I felt no anger, no joy, only silence. Life was doing what I never could, teaching him what real failure looks like. His fall was quick. The company closed. The money vanished. The cars, the house, the pride, all gone within months. His name became a warning, not an example. People who once praised him avoided him now. The same friends who laughed at me that night disappeared from his side. I didn't need to punish him. Time had done it perfectly. One day, one of my managers came into my office with a file. He said there was a new job applicant who had impressive experience but a difficult past. I didn't pay attention until I saw the name. My son's name. For a moment, everything stopped. I stared at it, feeling something I couldn't name. Not revenge, not pain, just a strange stillness. I asked my manager to set up an interview for the next morning. He didn't know who the man was to me. Nobody in my company did. That night, I didn't sleep. I thought about all the years between us, the hunger, the silence, the distance, the words he said, the man he became. I didn't imagine seeing him again like this. The boy who once called me a failure was now applying for a job at the company I built from dust. It almost didn't feel real. The next morning, I reached the office early. I sat behind my desk, calm and ready. When he walked in, I recognized him instantly. His shoulders were slouched, his hair graying, his eyes tired. The confidence he once carried like armor was gone. Life had stripped him bare. He looked older than me. I could tell he had suffered. His clothes were neat but cheap, his shoes worn out. For a moment, I saw not a man, but the broken remains of arrogance. He handed his resume to my assistant without looking up. When she called his name and asked him to step in, he walked into my office and froze. He saw me. His face turned pale. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes searched mine for anger, for hate, for something sharp. But I had none left to give. I just sat there, still, watching him realize the truth. The same hands that once repaired shoes now signed his paycheck. The man he mocked for being poor now decided whether he would eat tomorrow. He sat down slowly, unable to speak. I told my assistant to leave us alone. The room was quiet except for the clock ticking. I looked at him for a long time, remembering the boy who once held my hand, who once said he'd make me proud. He couldn't even lift his eyes now. I saw shame, fear, regret. All the things life makes you feel when you finally meet the truth. I didn't scold him. I didn't question him. I simply opened the file, read his application, and stamped it, approved. He looked at me in disbelief. He didn't say a word, and neither did I. He stood up, nodded once, and left the room quietly. That day, my company gained a new employee, and I gained a kind of peace I had never known. The same silence that once hurt me now protected me. My revenge was simple. I didn't have to destroy him. I just had to succeed. He walked into the interview room slowly, his steps careful, his eyes low. The air felt heavy, but my face stayed calm. I had lived through storms far worse than awkward silence. He sat across from me, and for the first time in many years, I saw my son not as the man he had become, but as the boy I once carried on my shoulders. The years had changed him. His once proud shoulders were bent, his expensive watch replaced by a scratched one, his hands restless, trembling slightly on his lap. He avoided my eyes like a man standing in front of a mirror he didn't want to face. I looked at him without speaking. The walls of the room felt smaller, filled with the weight of everything unsaid. Between us sat a file with his name on it, the same name that had once appeared in bright gold on office doors, now printed in plain black ink on a cheap folder. I opened it slowly, reading his qualifications as if I hadn't already memorized every part of his life from a distance. Each word felt like a story: success, collapse, and now, desperation. My assistant had already told me he was overqualified for the position. He was applying for a junior manager's role, a job that paid a fraction of what he once earned. But that didn't matter now. Pride doesn't pay bills. Hunger doesn't care about titles. When I looked up, he was staring at the floor. His lips were tight, his eyes slightly red. I could see he was trying to hold himself together. I asked simple questions: work experience, skills, expected salary. His voice was weak, cracking every few sentences. The man who once laughed loudly now struggled to finish a line. Every answer reminded me of the past, the nights I spent outside his office gate waiting for a minute of his time, the silence he left me in for years, the humiliation I carried quietly while he enjoyed applause. But sitting there, I didn't feel hate. I felt something else, a strange mix of pity and peace. Life had done its job. It had humbled him, the same way it once broke me. The same world that mocked me for being poor had now turned its back on him for being proud. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes met mine for the first time in years. There was no pride left, no arrogance, only shame. He whispered my name softly, not as a son, but as a man begging for a second chance. I didn't move. I let the silence answer for me. I reached for the pen beside me, stamped the paper, and slid it across the table toward him. Approved. His eyes widened. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. He looked down again, nodded once, and stood up. Before leaving, he said quietly, "Thank you, sir." That word, sir, echoed in my head long after he left the room. I had imagined 1,000 ways we might meet again, but never like this. I thought I would be angry, that I would throw his past in his face, that I would demand an apology. But instead, I felt calm. Time had already done the talking. He didn't need punishment. He had already lived through it. I didn't need revenge. I had already won mine in silence. When the door closed behind him, I leaned back in my chair and exhaled deeply. The sound of his footsteps faded down the hallway. I looked at the file on my desk again. It wasn't just a job application. It was proof that life always comes full circle. The man who once told me I would die poor now needed the poor man to survive. I didn't hire him out of mercy. I hired him out of truth, because no punishment is heavier than having to serve the one you once looked down on. The lesson was complete. He came to work on a Monday morning. The rain had just stopped, and the air smelled of wet soil and metal. I arrived early as usual, checked the machines, greeted the workers, and watched him enter the gate like any other new employee. His head was low, his steps quiet, his face pale. No one knew who he was to me. To them, he was just another man looking for a chance to rebuild his life. He wore a plain shirt, carried a small lunchbox, and kept his eyes on the floor. I watched from the corner of my office window as he joined the others for the morning roll call. He didn't ask for special treatment. He didn't try to show experience. He started at the bottom, sweeping the floor, organizing files, carrying boxes, serving tea to seniors who were younger than him. I saw him struggle to fit in, but I said nothing. His pride, once taller than any building, had now bent like a weak branch in a storm. I didn't need to humiliate him. Life had already done that. Each "yes, sir" he spoke to others carried the weight of the man he used to be. Every "thank you, sir" echoed through the halls like a reminder of the circle we were trapped in. At lunch, he sat alone. No one joined him because they didn't know him. He ate quietly, not touching half of his food, staring at the floor between every bite. Some workers joked around him, but he didn't react. I watched him from afar, not as a father, but as an employer. I had to stay silent, had to let him learn what it meant to start from the ground, the same ground I had once built from nothing. Days passed. He began to understand the rhythm of the place, the sound of machines, the weight of orders, the speed of production. He followed instructions carefully, always early, always quiet. He made mistakes but never argued. When supervisors corrected him, he nodded, accepted it, and moved on. I saw in his eyes a reflection of myself, the same endurance, the same silence, the same hunger to rebuild. It almost felt like time had reversed, like he was living the life I once lived, and I was watching it from the other side of the glass. He never missed a day of work. He came before sunrise and left after sunset. Some of the younger workers started to respect him for his discipline. They didn't know his story, but they admired his effort. I kept my distance, pretending not to notice, though every report that came across my desk carried his name. The irony never escaped me. The man who once laughed at my old shoes now wiped grease from his hands in my factory. The son who once refused to shake my hand now opened doors for me and said, "Good morning, sir," with lowered eyes. I didn't gloat. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt finished, like a chapter that had written itself. Revenge wasn't my goal. I wanted peace, and I had found it in the most unexpected way. I realized that the greatest victory isn't watching someone fall. It's standing tall when they finally look up. Weeks turned into months. He continued working quietly, never complaining, never missing a task. He had changed completely. The arrogance was gone, replaced by humility carved by hardship. He didn't know I was watching every step, every gesture, every small act of discipline. I wasn't his enemy anymore. I was his mirror. Every night before I left the office, I would look at the workers cleaning up the floor. He was always the last one there. I saw him pick up tools, organize boxes, and switch off the lights before leaving. It reminded me of myself years ago. Tired, unnoticed, but determined. And each time he said, "Good night, sir," before walking out the door, it felt like the world itself had bowed to the truth. Months passed quietly. He worked without complaint, without pride, without excuses. The man who once believed the world owed him now thanked the guard for opening the gate each morning. I watched from my office window as he arrived early, carrying his lunchbox, wearing the same faded shirt, nodding politely to everyone he met. There was no arrogance left in him. His walk had changed, his eyes had changed, even the tone of his voice had changed. Every "Good morning, sir" came from a place of humility, not fear. Life had done what my words never could. It had rebuilt him piece by piece, stripping away everything false until only truth remained. He learned fast. He started fixing problems no one else could. He stayed late when others rushed home. He began helping the new workers, guiding them with patience. Slowly, the supervisors started trusting him with more responsibility. They said he was reliable, hardworking, humble. They had no idea how much weight that word carried for me. Every report praising him felt like a small crack healing inside my chest. Not because I wanted him to rise again, but because I wanted him to understand what real work meant. One evening, as the factory lights dimmed and most workers had gone, he knocked softly on my office door. I told him to come in. He entered slowly, holding his cap in his hands, eyes down, posture straight but nervous. The air between us was heavy with years of silence. He stood there for a few seconds, searching for words, then spoke quietly. His voice was steady, but I could hear the guilt behind it. He said he didn't deserve my kindness. He said he didn't deserve a place in my company. He said I should have turned him away. I didn't interrupt. I let him speak until the words stopped. Then I looked at him. Really looked. The face that once carried pride now carried peace. The same eyes that once mocked me were now filled with tears he didn't try to hide. I stood up, walked around the desk, and placed a hand on his shoulder. I told him he deserved the job because this time he had earned it. Not through money, not through power, not through luck, but through effort, humility, and pain. He nodded slowly, unable to speak. A single tear rolled down his cheek, landing on the floor between us. It wasn't the tear of a broken man. It was the tear of a man finally free from his own arrogance. For a long moment, we stood there in silence, two men who had both been poor in different ways, one poor in money, the other poor in character, and both had finally found their wealth in understanding. When he left that night, I sat back down and stared at the empty chair across from me. It was strange how life worked. The son I once lost had come back, not through blood or family ties, but through the lessons of time. I realized revenge was never about hurting someone back. It was about living so well that they heal through your example. The next morning, when he greeted me again, his voice was calm and steady. There was no shame, no fear, just respect. Not for my position, but for the journey that brought us both there. I nodded and said nothing. Some lessons don't need words. From that day on, he worked with quiet pride. Not the pride that looks down on others, but the pride that comes from doing something right. He didn't call me father again. He didn't have to. Every sir carried more meaning than any other word could. I had stopped being his parent long ago, but now I had become his teacher, and that was enough. That night, as I closed the office and stepped into the quiet street, I looked up at the dark sky and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not victory, not triumph, just peace. Because the man who once mocked me for being poor now bowed not to my wealth, but to my strength. Years have passed since that day, and the story has gone full circle. The factory still runs, the machines still hum, and every morning he still walks in through the same gate. Clean shirt, lowered eyes, quiet respect. People who visit the office see us working in the same building and never guess the truth. They don't know that the man who once called me useless now calls me sir. They don't know that the man who once laughed at my old shoes now polishes his own before stepping into my office. They don't know that the man who once thought I was beneath him now stands at attention when I speak. Only time knows. Only life remembers. I watch him now and see something that makes me both proud and sad. He's no longer the man who hurt me, but he's also no longer the boy I raised. He's something in between. Someone rebuilt by pain and regret. When he speaks to me, his tone carries no pride, only patience. When he finishes a job, he waits for my approval like a student waiting for a teacher's nod. I give it quietly because I know the lesson has already been learned. I don't need to remind him of the past. Life has done that every single day since the moment he walked back through my doors. Sometimes, late at night when everyone leaves, I walk around the empty factory floor. The lights cast long shadows, and the smell of leather lingers in the air. I touch the tables, the tools, the machines, everything built by my own hands. Each mark tells a story. Each stain reminds me of how far I've come. From being mocked as a poor man to being respected by the same son who once disowned me. It feels unreal, but it's real. It happened one quiet day at a time. I think about all the fathers who give up when their children forget them. I think about all the old men sitting in silence, believing they lost. I wish I could tell them this. Don't lose heart. Life has its own strange way of returning balance. The world may take away respect, comfort, and peace. But if you keep working, keep believing, keep standing, one day it gives everything back, even if it comes wrapped in silence. I never told him how deeply he hurt me that day in his office years ago. I never told him about the sleepless nights, the hunger, the humiliation, the loneliness. I didn't have to. He sees it every time our eyes meet. He feels it every time he says, "Good morning, sir." He carries the weight of it in every polite bow, every quiet, "Thank you," every small act of respect. And I don't stop him. Because forgiveness doesn't always need to be spoken. Sometimes, forgiveness is shown in the way you keep moving forward without hate. Now, when I walk through the factory and hear workers greeting me, I nod and smile. I've learned that being poor was never my shame. It was my test. Wealth didn't change me, it revealed me. And poverty didn't destroy me, it built me. My son's laughter once broke my spirit, but his respect rebuilt my peace. My story isn't about revenge, it's about patience. It's about the strength of staying silent when the world laughs and still standing tall when the same world bows. My son mocked me for being poor. Now he works for me and calls me sir. And in that one word lies the truth of everything I lived through. That respect earned through pain lasts longer than love born from comfort. Final thought. Never underestimate the man who stays quiet when he's broken. One day, he'll own the very ground where he was once made to kneel.